I built an empire, but I walked past my greatest treasure every single day for 25 years. I saw him as just another worker, a quiet shadow, sweeping my floors, and then my home. I looked right through him, never imagining the truth, never seeing the heart that beat with my own blood. Now the silence screams louder than any success. I dismissed my own brother, and it cost me everything. Before I continue, drop a comment telling me where you're listening to this from. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. You won't want to miss the ending. The sprawling estate in Atlanta, Georgia, once felt like the crown jewel of my empire, a monument to every deal closed, every risk taken, every ladder I'd climbed. Now, the silence in its grand rooms simply echoed. At 68, retired, and supposedly at the pinnacle of my life, all I felt was a profound, aching emptiness that even the countless zeros in my bank account couldn't fill. The manicured lawns and stately oak trees outside the window offered no comfort, just a stark contrast to the barren landscape within me. I sat at my mahogany desk, the polished surface reflecting the faint light from the overcast sky. It was too quiet. Always too quiet these days. My gaze fell upon an old, framed photograph nestled amongst stacks of financial reports and legal documents. It was faded, blurry around the edges, a testament to the passage of time. In it, my young parents stood proudly in front of a ramshackle barn, their faces etched with the hard work of rural Georgia farm life, but smiling. Beside them, a much younger me, perhaps 10 years old, grinned gap-toothed, my arm around a scruffy hound dog. The simple, raw innocence of that moment, frozen in time just before everything changed, was a constant, gentle torment. I picked up the photograph, my thumb tracing the outline of my father's weathered hand, then my mother's kind face. A pang of nostalgia, sharp and bittersweet, pierced through the carefully constructed walls I'd built around my heart. That life, that boy, felt like a ghost, a forgotten dream from a lifetime ago. I remembered the scent of red clay, the hum of cicadas in the summer heat, the feeling of dirt beneath my bare feet. It was a world I'd left behind, a past I'd willingly, eagerly outrun in my relentless pursuit of what I believed was success. I'd convinced myself that wealth was the ultimate measure of a man, that building an empire justified any sacrifice, any distance. But what had it cost me? Looking at that photograph now, it felt like everything. The truth was, I hadn't just outrun poverty. I'd outrun a part of myself, a part I now realized was vital, irreplaceable. I'd walked past the most profound truth every single day for decades, oblivious, indifferent. My success, my carefully curated image of a man who had everything, was built on a foundation of blindness. I remember thinking, back then, that I was destined for more than the dust and struggle of that farm. And I achieved it, didn't I? Multi-million-dollar deals, skyscrapers bearing my name, a life of absolute luxury. But the silence in this opulent house, the hollow feeling in my chest, told a different story. It whispered of a profound regret, a terrible oversight that had festered beneath the surface of my triumphant life, only now erupting with a devastating clarity. The silence of what was lost now screamed louder than any victory I had ever known. It wasn't a gentle whisper. It was a howl, tearing at the fabric of my composure. It started more than 25 years ago, when a quiet, unassuming man named Chester first walked into the gleaming lobby of my corporate building in downtown Atlanta. He was just a shadow then, part of the night-cleaning crew, a face I barely registered, certainly not one I could ever have imagined would hold the key to my deepest sorrow and the unforgivable cost of my indifference. I saw him as a cog in the machine, a necessity for keeping my polished world spotless, never as a human being with a story, much less a story intertwined with my own lost childhood. He cleaned my corporate offices for 20 years, a ghost moving through the corridors after hours, emptying wastebaskets, buffing floors to a mirror shine. I saw him, of course, occasionally, when I worked late or came in early. A nod, maybe a terse, "Good morning." Never more. To me, he was just Chester, the night janitor. He wore the same faded blue uniform, carried the same quiet dignity, and vanished into the shadows before the first wave of my executives arrived. When I retired, I brought him to my personal residence. 5 more years. 5 more years of him moving through my home like a familiar, yet utterly unseen, fixture. 5 more years of my blindness. My ambition had blinded me. My self-absorption had built a wall between me and the world, and most painfully, between me and a profound hidden tie that ran deeper than blood itself. I thought I knew what regret felt like, but nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the crushing weight of this. The sheer, unfathomable magnitude of what I had ignored, what I had dismissed, was a boulder on my chest. It wasn't just a missed connection. It was a lifetime of unacknowledged kinship, of shared history tragically lost to pride, and a lie. I remembered that farm, the fire, the scramble. But the truth of what came after, the full, devastating truth, that was a secret I had lived alongside, yet never known, until it was far, far too late. In those early corporate years, the downtown office building felt like the very heartbeat of my ambition. It was a 20-story testament to my drive, a place where deals were forged, fortunes were made, and I, Harold McAllister, was at the center of it all. I thrived on the hum of the city, the late nights, the early mornings, the constant churn of progress. Sleep was a luxury, leisure a distraction. My focus was absolute, my vision clear. Build an empire. Chester Alcott was simply part of the background, a silent, efficient presence. He was the night cleaner, the one who moved through the empty offices like a ghost after everyone else had left. Sometimes, when I stayed late, poring over blueprints or financial reports, he would appear, pushing his cart, a soft whirring from his vacuum cleaner, the only sound in the vast silence. He wore a faded blue uniform, always neat despite its age, and a quiet dignity that was almost invisible. I'd offer a curt nod, maybe a muttered, "Evening, Chester," and then my gaze would return to the glowing screen, my mind already miles away. He knew my habits, though I never realized it at the time. My coffee mug, left on my desk, would be washed and waiting for me, perfectly placed the next morning. The stack of newspapers I'd skimmed would be neatly folded. My wastebasket, often overflowing with discarded notes from a frantic day, would be emptied without a trace. He was reliable, utterly dependable, and completely invisible. That was exactly what I wanted from my staff. Efficiency and discretion. I paid him well enough, I thought, for a man in his position. His job was to maintain the gleaming facade of my success, and he did it without complaint, without fuss. I remember one particularly grueling week, negotiating a massive merger that stretched me to my limits. I'd been living on lukewarm coffee and sheer willpower. One Tuesday night, close to midnight, I was slumped over my desk, a knot of tension in my shoulders, staring at a spreadsheet that refused to balance. Chester came into my office, his quiet movements a familiar backdrop. He stopped at the edge of my desk, wiping it down with a soft cloth. I barely looked up. "Rough night, Mr. McAllister?" he murmured, his voice soft, almost apologetic for breaking the silence. I grunted, running a hand over my tired face. "Just trying to make sense of this mess, Chester. Big deal on the line." He didn't say anything more, just continued his slow, methodical work. But then, as he moved towards the door, I finally lifted my head, my eyes blurry from screen strain. For a split second, our gazes met. His eyes, usually downcast or neutral, held something I couldn't quite place. It wasn't pity, not exactly. It was a tenderness, a quiet understanding, almost as if he saw beyond the stressed-out businessman to something deeper. A flicker of worry, a hint of sorrow, a profound familiarity I couldn't account for. It was a look that lingered for just a beat too long, too rich with unspoken feeling for a mere employee. My mind, however, was already back on the numbers, the deadlines, the weight of the deal. I dismissed it instantly. He was a good man, a loyal worker, I thought. He was probably just sympathizing with my workload, the way any decent person would. I nodded, a quick, dismissive gesture, and turned back to my monitor, the glow reflecting in my tired eyes. "Thanks, Chester," I said, already forgetting the moment. He slipped out, leaving me alone with my empire and my ambition. I never thought about that look again. Not until much, much later. My world was too big, too important, too demanding for me to notice the quiet warmth in a janitor's eyes, or to question why it felt so strangely familiar. I was too busy building my monument to look for hidden connections, too self-absorbed to see beyond the surface. That night, like every other night for 25 years, I looked right through the man who was silently watching over me, oblivious to the fact that he was the last living echo of the life I had left behind. The years folded into each other, a blur of ambition and achievement. 20 years I spent building my empire from that downtown Atlanta office, and Chester Alcott was a quiet constant, a fixture in the background of my demanding life. He moved from the silent, empty corridors after hours to the bustling, pre-dawn calm. Always there, always unseen. My focus was absolute, my world a whirlwind of deals and deadlines, leaving little room for anything but the next success. Then came the transition to my sprawling estate, a grand retirement for a man who never truly retired. I brought Chester with me, of course. Not out of any personal attachment, but because he was reliable. He knew my habits, kept the corporate building spotless, and I assumed he'd do the same for my personal residence. 5 more years he walked through the halls of my home, a shadow tending to my polished floors and pristine surfaces. 5 more years of my profound blindness. I remember one particularly harsh winter in the city, an aggressive flu sweeping through Atlanta. I, of course, refused to be sidelined. A sick day was a weakness I couldn't afford. I holed up in my office, feverish and coughing, determined to push through a critical negotiation. Late one night, Chester, making his rounds, noticed the crumpled tissues, the heavy eyes, the sheen of sweat on my forehead. He said nothing, just continued his work. The next morning, tucked beside my expensive leather briefcase, I found a modest thermos, still warm, and a small plain container of homemade chicken noodle soup. A neatly folded note in simple handwriting read, "Hope you feel better, sir." I was surprised, momentarily touched. I assumed my executive assistant had arranged it, a thoughtful gesture from someone in the administrative pool. I never once considered it was Chester, the silent man with the vacuum. When he later asked, in his soft murmur, if I was feeling any better, I just waved a dismissive hand. "Just a bit of a sniffle, Chester," I replied, my voice raspy. "Nothing a busy man can't work through. No time for weakness." He simply nodded, his eyes unreadable, and went back to his dusting. Another year, my 50th birthday. A milestone, I suppose, but my mind was consumed with a hostile takeover bid that threatened months of work. My calendar was full of meetings, not celebrations. The phone didn't ring with many personal wishes. My small circle of remaining relatives were scattered, distant, or simply busy with their own lives. Working late, as usual, I returned from a quick coffee run to find a small, beautifully potted African violet sitting on the corner of my desk. No card, no fanfare, just the vibrant purple blossoms against the stark mahogany. I raised an eyebrow. A fleeting thought of a secret admirer. More likely, I concluded, it was from a junior staffer hoping to catch my eye. I barely gave it a second glance, pushing it slightly to make room for my paperwork. When Chester came in later that night, I simply said, without looking up, "Chester, you needn't bother with these sorts of things. My time is for business, not frivolous celebrations." He just gave a small, quiet sigh that I barely registered above the rustle of my papers. Even after I moved to the estate and Chester transitioned to cleaning my home, these quiet acts continued, and my blindness persisted. I had a small, old, framed map of Georgia, a gift from my long-gone father, hanging in my study. It wasn't particularly valuable, but it held sentimental meaning. One afternoon, I noticed it was tilting precariously on its hook. I made a mental note to tell the housekeeper, but promptly forgot. A few days later, I saw it hanging perfectly straight, the wire on the back clearly reinforced with a small, careful twist of heavier gauge wire. I remember thinking, seems more secure now. Good. No telling what kind of clumsy help I have around here, always knocking things out of place. I assumed it was the general staff, taking care of general tasks, never singling out the quiet man who moved through my home with such deliberate care. He was just part of the machinery, a paid hand, and I had simply expected everything to be perfect. The thought that he might be doing these things out of a deeper, unspoken care never even brushed my consciousness. My world was perfectly maintained, and I simply accepted it as the due reward for my success, never once realizing the profound hidden devotion that went into these small, ignored gestures. The grand office in my Atlanta estate, with its rich mahogany and sweeping views of the Georgia pines, was usually a sanctuary. But on that particular afternoon, it felt like a pressure cooker. I was on the phone, the receiver pressed tight against my ear, my voice sharp and precise, trying to wrestle a multi-million-dollar real estate acquisition into submission. It was a delicate dance of numbers and egos, and one wrong word could send the whole deal crashing down. My brow was furrowed, my tie loosened, and my usually calm demeanor was frayed at the edges. Just as I was about to deliver a crucial point, a low hum started from the hallway. Chester. He always did his vacuuming at this time, an hour I usually reserved for my calls. Today, however, the timing couldn't have been worse. The soft whirring, typically so unobtrusive, felt like a jackhammer in my already strained head. I tried to ignore it, to focus on the voice in my ear, but the sound was an irritating drone, pulling at the frayed ends of my concentration. I gestured impatiently towards the door, trying to catch his eye, but Chester was focused, moving methodically across the expensive Persian rug. He didn't look up. The vacuum continued its rhythmic thrum. My voice rose a fraction, fighting to be heard over the noise. "Yes, well, the contingency is non-negotiable, David. We stand firm." Suddenly, as Chester turned the corner into my direct line of sight, pushing the vacuum with his usual quiet diligence, I saw it. A fresh tear, jagged and noticeable, in the sleeve of his old, faded work shirt. It wasn't a small fray. It was a definite rip, exposing a patch of skin beneath. He'd worn that same kind of simple, blue-collared shirt for as long as I could remember. But this tear was new, stark against the well-worn fabric. All the stress, all the pressure of the deal, all my exhaustion from a lifetime of relentless ambition condensed into a single irrational burst of anger. The hum of the vacuum, the critical phone call, the sight of that ragged shirt, it all converged. I snapped. I slammed my hand, not the phone, down on the desk with a sharp thud that made the caller on the other end pause. "Chester!" I barked, my voice tight with irritation, louder than I intended. Chester immediately stopped the vacuum, the sudden silence almost deafening. He stood still, stoic, his eyes fixed on the floor, waiting. "For heaven's sake, Chester," I continued, my voice laced with disdain. "Can't you afford a decent shirt? Look at yourself. You're a reflection on my household. This isn't some backwoods shack. I pay you well enough. Stop coming to work looking like you just crawled out of a ditch." My words hung in the air, sharp and unthinking. I didn't mean them to be cruel, not really. It was just frustration, a moment of weakness, an unthinking lashing out. I saw him as part of the machinery of my perfect life, and that tear was a flaw, a visible blemish I couldn't tolerate. Chester didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He didn't cry out or offer an excuse. He simply went utterly, unnervingly still. His shoulders, usually slightly stooped from years of work, seemed to straighten just a fraction. He slowly, deliberately, turned off the vacuum completely. Then he lifted his head, and for a fleeting moment, his eyes met mine. They were unreadable, devoid of emotion, yet profoundly heavy. There was no anger, no resentment, no pleading, just a quiet, desolate acknowledgement, as if a switch had been flipped, or a door quietly, irrevocably, shut behind them. Whatever warmth, whatever unspoken understanding I had occasionally glimpsed in those eyes over the past 25 years, it vanished, extinguished like a candle flame in a sudden gust of wind. It was gone, replaced by a blankness, a profound emptiness that chilled me, even in my frustration. He simply nodded once, a slow, stiff movement, then quietly, without a word, pushed the vacuum cleaner towards the closet and disappeared from my office. I turned back to the phone, my heart still thumping with residual anger, though a tiny flicker of unease had started to prick at me. I finished the call, closed the deal, another triumph to add to the ledger of my life, but the triumphant feeling was muted, overshadowed by the sudden heavy silence in the room, a silence more profound than before. And since you've made it this far, go ahead and hit that like button. It really helps me keep bringing stories like this. The next morning, Chester did not come. The house felt different, subtly but unmistakably. The usual faint smell of lemon polish was absent. The newspapers weren't neatly stacked on the breakfast nook table. My coffee mug, left haphazardly on the counter, was still there, unwashed. I assumed he was sick, or perhaps had taken a rare day off without informing anyone. My initial thought was annoyance, a ripple of inconvenience. I paid him good money. This was unprofessional. I called the agency, ready to complain, ready to find a replacement. But there was no agency. I had hired Chester directly after he left the corporate cleaning company. I realized with a jolt I didn't even have his phone number. He was just gone. I told myself it didn't matter. He was just a cleaner. But the silence in the house, a silence that had once felt like peace, now felt like an accusation. The following morning, my grand Atlanta estate felt off. It wasn't just the lack of the faint lemon scent that usually permeated the air after Chester's morning rounds. It was a deeper, unsettling quiet. A vacuum that felt heavier than usual. My coffee mug was still on the counter, unwashed, and the stack of newspapers lay scattered, not neatly folded as I'd grown accustomed to. My initial thought, as I'd told myself the night before, was annoyance, unprofessional. I paid good money for dependability. I called a local cleaning service, irritated, and by noon, a woman named Norma Bates arrived. She was younger, bustled with a kind of loud energy, and hummed off key as she pushed the vacuum. Her presence felt disruptive. She used a chemical cleaner that left a harsh, antiseptic smell, completely different from Chester's subtle lemon polish. I watched her through the doorway of my study as she clattered the vacuum hose against the leg of an antique side table, then missed a noticeable dust bunny in the corner of the dining room. Later, I found she'd rearranged a small collection of my father's old hunting trophies, placing a brass pheasant on the wrong shelf, out of its usual, precise spot. It was small, trivial, but it grated on me. Chester would never have made such careless mistakes. He had a quiet respect for things, for order, for the unspoken routines of the house. For 3 days, Norma came and went, leaving behind a house that was technically clean, but deeply, fundamentally wrong. The silence that had initially felt like an empty space left by Chester's absence now felt like a missing piece. It wasn't just the dust bunnies or the strong chemical smell. It was the way the light fell differently without his quiet presence. The way the house no longer felt like a well-oiled machine, but a collection of objects clumsily handled. I found myself noticing every little imperfection, every misplaced item, every detail that Chester had, for 25 years, made flawless. My irritation began to morph into something else, a prickle of unease. Chester was never late. He never missed a day. And after that sharp exchange, his sudden disappearance felt pointed. A flicker of that uncomfortable blankness in his eyes came back to me. Had I truly offended him so deeply? Had my words pushed him away, irrevocably? The thought sat uncomfortably in my stomach, like cold, undigested food. It was utterly unlike me to dwell on an employee's feelings, but the absence of Chester, the sheer emptiness of his silent efficiency, began to weigh on me. On the fourth morning, I woke up with a knot in my chest I couldn't ignore. The house, despite Norma's efforts, felt hollow. I realized I knew nothing about Chester Alcott. Not really. I didn't have a phone number for him, not even an emergency contact. For all his years of dedicated service, he was simply Chester, the cleaner. It was a realization that shamed me, a deep-seated embarrassment that pricked at my pride. I sat at my desk, running a hand over my thinning hair. This was ridiculous. He was just a cleaner. But the need to find out why he hadn't shown up, to somehow rectify this unsettling void, had become an insistent whisper in my mind. I couldn't just let it go. It was unlike me to do such a thing, to get personally involved, but something gnawed at me. I remembered, vaguely, a conversation years ago. Chester had mentioned living in a modest apartment building near the old Decatur Road, something about a little grocery store nearby. It wasn't much, but it was a lead. Something nudged me, an unfamiliar impulse that bordered on guilt, telling me I couldn't send someone else. I had to go myself. I got into my Mercedes, the leather seats a stark contrast to the threadbare shirt I had chastised him for. I drove myself, something I rarely did anymore, navigating the familiar Atlanta streets with a newfound purpose. The address was a guess, a vague memory. I found a cluster of older red brick apartment buildings, some with peeling paint, a world away from my manicured estate. I parked and walked towards the entrance of one, a small faded sign identifying it as Pine Ridge Apartments. I knocked on the manager's door, a stern woman with heavy glasses answering. "I'm looking for Chester Alcott," I began, trying to sound authoritative. "He works for me, and he hasn't been to work in a few days. I'm concerned." The manager looked at me, her face unreadable. "Mr. Alcott?" she repeated, slowly. Her eyes narrowed just a fraction, a wary, almost sad look entering them. She paused as if weighing her words, and then spoke, her voice lower than before. He hasn't been around. Not for a while. You might want to try the social services office, Mr. McAllister. Helen Greer handles things for folks who don't have family, you understand?" My heart gave a strange lurch. "Social services? What do you mean, not for a while?" I pressed, a cold dread starting to creep up my spine. She shook her head, a sigh escaping her lips. "I really can't say more. It's confidential. But Ms. Greer, she's a good woman. She'll know." Her evasiveness was a clear signal, a silent alarm bell ringing in my ears. The manager closed the door softly, leaving me standing alone in the humid Georgia air, a profound sense of foreboding settling over me. What had happened to Chester? And why had it taken me so long to even ask? The manager's door closing softly behind me felt like a final chilling punctuation mark. Social services? Helen Greer. The words echoed in my mind as I walked back to my Mercedes, each step feeling heavier than the last. The vague dread that had pricked at me earlier had now solidified into a cold, hard knot in my stomach. What did she mean? Not for a while. The way she'd avoided my gaze, the quiet sadness in her voice, it all spoke volumes. My perfect, ordered world, where problems were solved with a phone call and a check, was suddenly feeling very fragile. I got back into the car, but I didn't start the engine right away. I just sat there, the air conditioning doing little to dispel the rising unease. It was unthinkable. Chester, the quiet shadow, the ever-present cleaner, the man I barely saw, could he really be in trouble? Or worse? The thought was an unwelcome intruder, shocking me with its intensity. For 25 years, he had been a reliable part of my life's backdrop. Now, his absence was a gaping hole. After a few minutes of wrestling with myself, I pulled out my phone. A quick search brought up the local county social services office. Helen Greer. The name came up with a picture of a kind-faced woman with sensible glasses. I punched in the number, my fingers strangely clumsy. The receptionist was polite, a gentle voice on the other end. "I'm calling about Chester Alcott," I stated, trying to keep my voice steady. "I was told to speak with Helen Greer." "One moment, please," she said. The silence on the line stretched, amplifying the thumping of my heart. Then a new voice, warm and professional, came on. "This is Helen Greer. How can I help you, Mr. McAllister?" "Harold McAllister," I supplied, feeling a strange mix of apprehension and a reluctant honesty. "I employ Chester Alcott. Or rather, I did. I haven't seen him in a few days, and I'm very concerned." There was a pause, a significant silence that confirmed my worst fears. Helen's voice, when she spoke again, was softer, tinged with genuine sorrow. "Mr. McAllister, I'm so sorry to be the one to tell you this. Chester passed away. He had a heart attack a few days ago, very sudden. He was found in his apartment." The words hit me like a physical blow. Heart attack. Sudden. Gone. Just like that. The knot in my stomach tightened, turning into a hollow ache. Chester. Dead. The quiet man, the invisible man, the man I had so carelessly dismissed, was gone. My words, "Stop coming to work looking like you just crawled out of a ditch," echoed in my ears. Sharper, more damning than ever. He was probably gone even as I'd uttered those cruel words. The timing was unbearable. I had no idea," I managed, my voice raspy. "He was so quiet, so private. He never spoke of any health issues." "Chester was a very private man," Helen confirmed gently. "He didn't have any immediate family listed in his records. I've been handling his personal affairs, trying to locate any next of kin. We've got his apartment mostly cleared out, but there are a few personal items left that we've been trying to catalog." "His apartment?" I asked, a sudden, desperate urge to see where he lived, to understand the man I had never truly seen. Could I see it? Or his belongings? Perhaps I could help identify something. It was a flimsy excuse, but the need was profound. Helen paused, then agreed. "Of course, Mr. McAllister. It's just a few blocks from here. I'll meet you there in 20 minutes. The drive felt like an eternity. My mind was reeling. Chester, gone. The quiet dignity, the unseen kindness, the familiar routine, all gone. And my last interaction with him had been a sharp, thoughtless rebuke. Guilt, raw and scorching, began to burn through me. Helen met me at the entrance to Chester's apartment building, a slightly older, red brick structure, just like the manager's office. She led me up 2 flights of stairs to a small, unassuming door. She unlocked it and pushed it open, stepping aside for me to enter. The apartment was small, humble, but impeccably neat. It was a one-bedroom with a worn but clean armchair, a small functional kitchen, and a narrow bed covered with a patchwork quilt in the bedroom. There was no grand mahogany, no sweeping views. Yet, as I stepped inside, I was struck by a warmth, a sense of lived-in contentment that my own opulent mansion often lacked. On a small chipped wooden table, stacks of old books stood neatly. Not the financial reports I devoured, but novels, poetry, and a well-loved Bible, its pages dog-eared and underlined. On the walls, not abstract art, but simple framed photographs, pictures of Chester with a group of smiling elderly women at what looked like a church potluck, his arm around a small excited child on a park bench, and a faded snapshot of him, much younger, laughing with a group of men in work overalls, dirt smudged on their faces, leaning against an old Ford truck. He had a life, a real life, a rich life, in ways I had never bothered to consider. Helen pointed to a small cardboard box on the kitchen counter. These are some of his personal effects we haven't gone through yet, mostly old papers and trinkets. I walked over, my eyes scanning the contents. A worn leather wallet, a neatly folded handkerchief, a few tarnished coins. My gaze settled on a small, heavy object at the bottom of the box. I reached in and picked it up. It was a tarnished silver signet ring, engraved with the single initial M for McAllister. Beneath the M, a small, delicately etched oak tree. The family crest I remembered from whispered stories of my grandfather. And on the inside of the band, worn but still legible, the year 1945. My fingers tightened around it, a strange jolt running through me. It was so familiar, yet utterly out of place here, in Chester Alcott's humble apartment. I turned it over and over in my hand, a growing confusion swirling in my mind. Where had Chester gotten this? This wasn't just any ring. This was a family heirloom. My family's heirloom. The same ring my paternal grandfather had passed down, the one I had inherited. But how? The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswered, making my head spin. I looked at Helen, my mind racing, a profound and terrifying possibility beginning to dawn. I picked up the tarnished silver signet ring, my fingers tightening around the cold metal. It was heavy, worn smooth in places from years of handling, but the engraving was unmistakable. A proud, blocky M for McAllister. Beneath it, a small, intricately etched oak tree, our family crest. And on the inside of the band, though faded, I could clearly make out the year 1945. My breath hitched. This wasn't just a ring. This was the McAllister family ring. The very same design, the exact same year, as the one I had inherited from my paternal grandfather when I turned 18. I wore my own on a chain around my neck, a private talisman of my heritage. How could Chester, my cleaner, have one just like it? The thought was a disorienting shock, a sudden crack in the carefully constructed facade of my world. Helen, I managed, my voice a strained whisper. Where did he get this? This is a McAllister family ring. My family. Helen Greer stepped closer, her expression shifting from professional sorrow to something deeply empathetic. She looked at the ring in my hand, then at my face, her gaze steady. That's quite a story, Mr. McAllister, and it's exactly why I have something for you. She reached into her neat leather satchel and pulled out a thick, official-looking envelope. It was sealed and clearly marked, in elegant but simple handwriting, to Harold McAllister, to be delivered upon my passing. The sender's name on the back was just as clear. Chester Alcott. My hands trembled as I took the letter. Chester had written this for me, after all these years. I tore open the seal, the paper crackling loudly in the small, quiet apartment. Inside, the handwriting was familiar, the same neat, simple script from the note that accompanied the chicken soup all those years ago. Harold. It began, simply, without a formal address. If you are reading this, I am gone. I always knew this day would come, and I didn't want the truth to die with me. Please forgive my silence. I hope you will understand why I kept it. My eyes scanned the words, leaping from sentence to sentence, each line a new, staggering blow. He wrote about the farm, our childhood, the dusty red clay of rural Georgia. He described the fire, the devastating loss that had ripped our family apart. Then came the part that stole my breath. After the fire, he wrote, Ma and Pa, God bless them, they couldn't see a way forward for both of us. You were older, smarter, more promising. Our aunt and uncle in Atlanta, they were doing well. They offered you a future, a chance out of the dust. They told Ma and Pa they'd take you, but only if you didn't look back. They said they told you I died in the fire. I know they did. I heard them. It was a lie to give you a clean start, a better life. My vision blurred. A lie. All those years, believing my younger brother, my little Chester, had perished in that terrible blaze. My aunt and uncle, those pillars of respectability, had built their kindness on a bedrock of deceit. The grief for a lost sibling, the one I'd carried silently for decades, suddenly twisted into a searing, agonizing betrayal. Helen's gentle voice broke through the ringing in my ears. We found records, Mr. McAllister. Adoption papers for you, to your aunt and uncle, dated shortly after the fire, and separate guardianship papers for Chester, placed with distant relatives in another county, just as he wrote. The dates, the names, it all lines up perfectly with what Chester detailed in his journals. He was always hoping, in his own quiet way, that someday you'd find him, or he'd find a way to tell you. I looked down at the ring in my hand again, the M, the oak tree, the 1945. This wasn't just a McAllister ring. This was proof. Chester was my brother, my younger brother, the one I mourned, the one I believed lost, had been sweeping my floors for 25 years. He knew, I choked out, the words barely audible. He knew it was me? All this time? Helen nodded slowly, her eyes brimming with a sadness that reflected my own burgeoning agony. Yes, Mr. McAllister. He knew. He told me once in a long conversation we had about next of kin that he recognized you immediately when you first hired him at your corporate office, said you had your father's eyes, even after all those years. He never forgot your face. My heart hammered against my ribs, a painful, frantic beat. He recognized me. He knew. And I had seen him as a shadow, a worker, a mere fixture in my grand, self-important life. The chicken soup, the African violet, the fixed map, all those little, silent acts of care, now illuminated by the devastating truth. They weren't from an assistant, or a junior staffer, or a clumsy worker. They were from Chester, my brother. My little brother, who I'd believed was dead, showing quiet, unwavering devotion to the man who saw right through him. He never held any bitterness. Helen continued softly, confirming the worst truth I could imagine. Never. He understood why you didn't know him. He said you had a better life now, that he didn't want to complicate things for you. He just hoped, he truly hoped, that one day you'd find your way back to him. He never wanted to force it. He just wanted you to see him, to know he was still here. The words landed like a physical blow, heavier than any anger, any accusation. Not bitterness, but a quiet, heartbreaking acceptance. He hadn't been angry. He had been understanding. He had watched me live my grand, successful life, believing I had forgotten him, or perhaps never wanted him, and he had simply accepted it. That profound, silent loyalty, that quiet sacrifice of his own recognition, shattered me. It was an unbearable truth, a testament to a love I had completely, unforgivably ignored. I had dismissed him, rebuked him for a torn shirt, and he had merely nodded, quietly accepting his fate, always watching, always hoping. The cost of my indifference was finally laid bare, and it was a price I could never, ever repay. The silence of my sprawling Atlanta estate was no longer just an echo. It was a roaring accusation, a deafening testament to a lifetime of profound, unforgivable blindness. I sat in my study, the grand mahogany desk before me, a monument to a success that now felt like a hollow mockery. In my hand, I clutched the tarnished silver signet ring engraved with the single initial M, the small oak tree, and the year 1945. It was identical to the one I wore on a chain around my neck, the one I'd inherited, the one that proclaimed my lineage. Chester's ring. Our ring. My younger brother. Chester. The quiet man, the invisible man, the man I had walked past for 25 years, was not just an employee. He was my blood, my kin, the last remaining piece of my lost childhood. The letter, his gentle, heartbreaking confession, lay open on the desk, its words searing themselves into my mind. He knew. He had always known. He had recognized the boy from the farm in the man who built an empire. I picked up the old, faded photograph from my desk, the blurry image of my parents and a 10-year-old me. Beside them, unseen in the frame, was the 7-year-old Chester, a ghost I had believed dead. The lie spun by my aunt and uncle, meant to free me to a better life, had become a prison of ignorance, separating me from the one person who carried the same memories, the same roots. Every interaction, every casual glance, every dismissive word now replayed in my mind, each one a fresh, agonizing stab. The night in my corporate office, when I'd been consumed by a deal, and Chester had offered that quiet, understanding gaze. It wasn't just an employee sympathizing with his boss. It was a brother, watching his sibling struggle, a silent, heartfelt plea for connection I had been too arrogant, too self-absorbed to see. He knew my burdens, felt my stress, perhaps even remembered the ambitious spark in the boy from the farm. The chicken noodle soup. Not from a secretary, not from some anonymous well-wisher, but from Chester, my brother, noticing my fever, my fatigue, and quietly, tenderly, bringing sustenance, a simple act of care from a heart I had entirely overlooked. "Hope you feel better, sir." He had called me sir, deferential, respectful, hiding his kinship behind the facade of his job, all the while caring for me as only family could. And I had brushed him off, proclaiming, "No time for weakness," never once recognizing the love in the gesture. The small African violet nestled on my desk on my 50th birthday. A silent purple bloom, a humble gift from a brother who knew it was my special day, even when I, in my self-important pursuit of business, had forgotten its significance. And my response? A curt dismissal, calling it frivolous, pushing it aside to make room for my paperwork. The shame burned hotter than any fire. The old map of Georgia in my study, fixed and resecured. Not some general staff taking care of a chore, but Chester, my brother, carefully preserving a small, tangible link to our shared past, the very land we'd called home. He had straightened it, reinforced it, a silent act of loyalty to a heritage I thought only I remembered. And then, the last day. The torn shirt, my voice sharp and cutting, dripping with disdain. "Can't you afford a decent shirt? You're a reflection on my household. Stop coming to work looking like you just crawled out of a ditch." My words, to my own brother. He hadn't flinched, hadn't argued, just turned off the vacuum, his eyes empty of the warmth I now understood to be familial love, and walked away. He had accepted my cruelty, my blindness, with a quiet dignity that now tore me apart. He had died alone shortly after that, his heart giving out, perhaps from the weight of all the unspoken words, all the unrecognized love. The weight of it was suffocating. I had built an empire, amassed a fortune, but I had lost the one true, irreplaceable treasure: the bond of family, the chance to know and cherish my own brother. I had measured success in dollars and properties, while the real measure of my life, the human connection, lay utterly bankrupt. The silence of the house, once merely empty, now screamed with the echoes of a lifetime of missed opportunities, of profound indifference, of a love I had casually discarded. The tarnished silver signet ring, warm from my grip, felt like a brand, a permanent mark of my failure. Chester, my brother, had loved me in silence, hoped in silence, and died in silence, while I, the great Harold McAllister, had lived in a gilded cage of self-absorption. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share it with someone who needs to hear this today. Your support is what brings these stories to more people.